2 inches come down in an hour. If it just runs off the land, it takes the topsoil with it. But if that soil is something more analogous to that chocolate cake soil, to some rich life growing there, then it can soak that up like a sponge a lot quicker and keep that benefit going forward. So this is a virtuous cycle that we can start to build, where we just manage our resources. It's a responsible land stewardship is what we're talking about here. So it's mighty fine. I know Adam loves it. I give him grief for being a Senor Vetiver. There's something called vetiver grass that its roots. This is just a grass that its roots go down 30 feet or 10 meters. And this is amazing. A great way to sequester carbon and hold land in place, prevent erosion. And he loves it. It's also good for the animals. They enjoy eating it. It's also medicinal. You can make a real potent fragrance from the roots of it. And so, Senor Vetiver is a moniker I give Adam here for wanting to plant this everywhere. He's got a nice little portion of land where he's done some experiments, and I know he wants to do a lot more. So we were surprised the other day the cows really enjoying the grass more than you might guess. That was cool to see. Yeah, we're going to have Tico come on in here in a little bit. Tico is all about cultivating soil with the microbes. There's more living creatures in a spoonful of potent soil than there are, stars in the galaxy. It's really incredible. And this sort of ecology is what we're talking about cultivating. And we see it come through in the food that we eat. We see that that nutrition, where we've got such a deficit here in the States, especially. We're using so much poison, and it kills the soil, and it chelates. It binds tightly those nutrients, so they're not bioavailable. And so when we talk about building a farm and bringing it all together, we talk about cultivating that soil. We start with the soil. We start from the ground up, and what an honor, what a privilege it is. And I love how simple and how elegant it can be so often. We talk about having, just our organic matter. What's a liability as far as our waste products. It's been said, don't let even a blade of grass leave your property. Keep that. You want to compost that. You want to add that to your soil. And so this is something that we're talking about cultivating here. Tico, I want to welcome you to the space. How you doing today, my brother?
Good morning, Johnny. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. How you feeling today?
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through well for me. I hear you loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. 1 2 1 2.
Okay, yeah, check 1 2 1 2. I got you loud and clear.
So yeah, was just kind of going over how these swales they're so great for slowing down that water flow. This can be a flood that takes us away, or this can be what brings us life. We have so many places around the world are just want the rain to come right now. But then when it comes, how many other places have too much rain and it's just, wiping everything away? We saw the big fires in California recently, and then we saw some big rains come, and then a flooding happened. And so, this is where, when we lose that vegetation from the soil, we're prone to have these sort of landslides, these mud floods, and this is something that we want to, protect against.
Yeah, 100%. And what we're trying to communicate to the masses is we want them to recognize the value of the soil itself. Whether it's to a storage capacity or a retention capacity or even a delivery capacity, because everything you just described, if water is falling out of the sky, from a human perspective or from a design perspective, whether it's a swale or anything else, what we'd like to do is slow down the runoff of the water, which mitigates the erosion, which is usually a big cost and issue and risk. But more importantly is absorb the water in place. So now we've slowed it down. We're absorbing it, which is a storage or a capacity thing. And then, as you just described, when we have healthy, biologically active soil, it's the release of the water that really creates the value add, because that release is what will slowly but surely not only feed the organisms, but it will grow the biomass or the plants. And that sort of model, which is, as I like to say, Big Perm's advantage, is it's closed loop. So what you're doing is by growing the soil or the organisms within the soil via the retention, absorption, and release of the water that's falling out of the sky, we end up getting a much higher performing output versus input. So that's our yield, right? And then the thing that we really don't quite, I think, leverage enough as a community is we reduce the risk profile, which to me would be like, hey, let's go to an insurance company and be like, hey, just so you know, if you planted these, let's say, perennials or other layering effects of type plants, you know what we can do for you here is we can reduce the risk profile for your insurance, whether it's an individual or an institution.
I love that. Well said. Yeah, that's exactly right. I saw Adam, you had your hand up. You still want to jump in there?
Yeah, man. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, sound great.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to echo what he was just saying. I was actually just trying to figure out how this thing works. This is my first time here on the Twitter space, so I'm figuring out how these buttons work. But yeah, I just wanted to echo that what he's saying. That's what it's all about. The storage, the slowing down the storage, the capture and store energy, which is one of David Holmgren's principles. And then, like you said, the release. So we do need to use these resources at some point. We don't just want to put the water in the ground for future generations. Obviously, we do want to do that, but then to get it stored in such a way that we can get it into our trees, especially our fruit trees, our timber trees, and that is the beauty of swales, right? So who was that guy? What was his name? T? Yeah, you're absolutely right, brother. You're absolutely right.
Word, Adam, I appreciate that. Yeah, my first name's Scotty, if you want to obviously go by that. But absolutely, is if we can communicate that message, whether it's to the individuals or the institutions per se, in my opinion, based on that language and that style and that model, they will end up at least becoming interested in what we're saying.
We got a little Twitter space going on here when we're trying to cut these.
Adoption. And the best part about Big Perm, and microbials and organisms and water and soil, is it's all decentralized. So if we can kind of layer that decentralized baseline to the system, then what we do is we start adding all sorts of decentralized little organisms like bees, crickets, and then move up into chickens, which is Johnny and I's favorite. Obviously all the way up into the ruminants, depending on the scale or the goal. But if we just maintain the fundamental principles, right, which, unfortunately in our world, for better or worse, is about like yield, right? If you told people it's like, hey, you're going to actually get better yields if you do this, boy, that's a big incentive for a lot of people to consider it. If I was an insurance company or a neighborhood that's having erosion or policy or risk problems, I wouldn't even really talk to them about yield. I'd talk to them about risk, because it's the business of risk that they're in. They don't necessarily need yield. So any way we can adopt our values, our principles, and our models to the existing system and show whether it's yield increase, risk decrease, or more importantly, value add via the compounding effect of healthy soil, more often than not, we're going to get people to kind of bite into that apple.
I love the way that building a swale. It's so low tech, and even figuring out what we want to do when we're doing that is kind of make this kind of like a mini dam. I tell people, and it's like it goes along an elevation on the land. So we're always having some dips, some valleys, and we want to figure out, when the rain comes, what's the level we want to have it up to where it's all going to be kept in. And a great way for doing this is with an A-frame. And so what this is a very low tech solution that you can build and without much time. You just have a level on a just take a regular level, put it on a little A-frame there in the middle, and then what you can do is you just sweep that around, and you're going to be able to find that point. You're going to be able to find that line, so you can start at one end or start in the middle and go out from there. And this is a real cool way that if you have a property that has some character, we can build this on. I want to put a link to that down in the comments there, so you can check that out.
Yeah, Johnny, the tech of a swale is very low, right? Like anybody can do it. You can almost do it on any type of soil composition or any kind of slope, whether it's flat or super steep. But yeah, if we basically create the swale, right, and we implement the swale throughout our subject property, that's exactly what happens is that tech or that model, which would include like curves, like 45s versus 90s, we end up creating more value for the design. So as soon as we create like that trench or that swale, and as soon as we work in that curved design, we're going to actually see the response via growth or nature, like the same way like we would heal a wound as humans, or a lizard would kind of regrow its tail. It ends up being a visual process, and it takes a little bit of time and adaptation. But once it sets in, and this is the best part about it with finance people, is once the actual model is established on that location via the swale, it becomes a compounding investment, which basically means it's going to provide a larger compounding return as it goes into the future, which is actually a huge incentive. And more importantly, it's counter to the existing conventional model, which is requiring us to go back to whether it's the supply house or the production people to get our inputs. So that component, in a nutshell, means, hey, on year one, it's only going to perform at 1 times X, but by the time you get to year 10, you're going to get the performance and the multiple, which means that compounding effect is going to generate a lot of wealth out of that soil.
I love that. Yeah, that's one way I like to talk about food forests, is that, these are legacies that get better with time. And you compare that with, this chemical agriculture that we see today, how it's just like, it has no mind for the future. This kind of wisdom from some cultures to think about, 7 generations going forward, and how our actions affect, that inheritance that we leave for our kids. It's that's the way we should be thinking, and whether it's sustainable or regenerative or whatever kind of terms we want to use. What we're doing now, as a they call it conventional agriculture, and I think that's such a misnomer, because conventional would have been what we've been doing for all of human history. This is chemical agriculture, this is poison agriculture, and it's killing our soil. And it's not just the pesticides, it's not just the insecticides, but it's actually the literal fertilizer that they're putting on the soil. Is these petroleum products, right? They're using salt to bind that nitrogen, which is wants to get away and get up into the air. They bind it with salt. So now this salt over the long term is damaging the soil. And so the way we're doing agriculture, it's just continually like making the food less nutrient dense and making things harder. And what we're talking about here today is the opposite. It's the answer. We can invest in that soil with these systems that are simple. They're elegant. They're natural, and we can we can see them in nature working. This is something about permaculture, is this idea of observation. We want to look at what works naturally, and we want to mimic that and put it into practice. And so, yeah, a lot of wisdom there to unpack.
Yeah, and in a nutshell, you guys, what that conventional, which I agree with Johnny, it goes to show you how words are turned against us. It really, from a financial aspect, is providing what's called a diminishing return, which means it requires more money via the input than it's providing in return on investment. And just so everybody knows, in that P&L report, they don't even include risk as a cost. So that is highly tilted towards their favor. And it's not that way by accident. It's a money printing machine, the fertilizer business. They're literally sucking nitrogen out of the air and then doing exactly what Johnny said. They're binding it with the salt, and then they're turning it into a mineral. And that mineral itself is what they're utilizing to nourish or feed the plant. What we're suggesting is that diminishing return is kind of coming to its cyclical end if we were talking to finance people. But if we were talking to farmers, I think that's a little bit different of an incentive, because farmers have a yield kind of motive, but it depends on the scale. So if it's just us, like if we're home gardening or if we're in like a sovereign kind of model, we just realize, hey, if we can produce our own inputs, we can produce our own minerals, our own elements, our own biology, which is what we're advocating, and we can get that into our local soil, what we're going to end up doing is increasing our return. And if we're a smaller farmer, or if we're just a home gardener, our return on investment would be more like yield, right? So it'd be like, hey, I have fruit, or I have herbs. So that turns into a quality of life thing. And I think that's the key with what we're trying to suggest is we want to add more biology to the model. We want to reduce the chemistry. We want to create a closed-looped, environmentally friendly, regenerative system. But we want the driver of that system to be value, performance, merit, yield, because what I want everybody to really know is we're on the right side of history, because in 10 or 20 years from now, we will not be talking about the conventional chemistry model being the dominant system within the farm or the agriculture industry.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. We're on the right side of history, that's for sure. Gosh, you just see this more and more. I put this up in the nest here, is these pictures, beautiful photos of the rice terraces of Vietnam. These are examples of swales. Just imagine this mountain, and imagine them getting these monsoon torrential rains. Imagine the erosion that happens and how hard that can be on the villages. And just imagine the dry season. A lot of these places will have 6 months of dry season where there's no rain coming down. And now look at these terraces. Look at how they're built. It's hard for me to imagine them at this scale. The scale of this to make these massive terraces along these mountains. But look how beautiful that is. I mean, this was a liability. You think, who can grow food on a mountainside? It's like, forget it. You want to be down in the plains where it's a whole lot easier. They've taken these mountainsides and they've turned them into, these super fertile settings where year after year, this is getting better and better. What would have been erosion of this mountain coming down the hillside, taking out the town, this is now captured in the terrace. That organic matter, the organic matter is building. And they can do aquaculture there. They can grow fish in the water and have their rice growing too.
Yeah.
And,
you say
man,
you see
I don't know.
Jan?
Yeah, he's right here.
Not much in nature, not much that man has made, anyways. That's more beautiful than what they're doing there, to me.
And what you can see there, Johnny, is they're mimicking the natural system versus engineering at perhaps somebody that went to Purdue. And that really does matter, because we had talked about how design and permaculture kind of go hand in hand. But basically what we're talking about, especially on a fundamental level, is freedom and sovereignty. Those villages do that because it gives them the freedom and sovereignty via their work effort, their design efforts, their smarts, right, their education. But what they're really trying to capitalize on is if we can just manage our own resources in a better way, which, it's hard to say if that's anti-capitalist, because I'm not a believer of that. I actually look at it as highly capitalist, but it's obvious that the existing system really encourages dependence. It enables dependence. It rewards dependence, for better or worse. And that, in my opinion, is unnatural. Because what we're really doing there is we're exchanging like the value of like a good or a service or the means of production for a note that was printed by a banker and financed via a bond that gives you more or less just a coupon. So if I was looking at that, I would look at that village as actually more sovereign than if they went to like a central bank and said, hey, can you just give us $30 million at a low interest rate?
That's exactly right. And it brings up the issue of real wealth. What is real wealth? And I think to begin with, our health is real wealth. And we talk about, let the food be the medicine. We talk about having food that is the best it can possibly be for us. When we are building that soil, that's exactly what we're creating. And we're also creating, a lot of our insect pressure, a lot of our pest pressure comes from the fact that a lot of the plants that we're growing more and more are weak. They don't have the bricks count that they should. They say the insects, they really kind of go after the weak plants. So when we're growing strong plants, we don't have that pest pressure. Now we don't need to use insecticides. This is a wealth creator in the long run as well. When you're less reliant on outside inputs, but just the toxicity alone. Some people say, "Oh, well, not all organic food is perfect all the time." I say, "Listen, man, I'm willing to pay a premium anytime. You give me 1% less poison in my food I'm eating and giving to my kids. I'm willing to pay a premium for that." And but organic food, by the way, is generally about at least 95% less toxic than the alternatives. Give me just one chemical in my strawberries rather than over a dozen. Thank you very much.
And Johnny, think of what you just said. As a consumer, you would pay more. That's like music to a farmer's ears, right? So that's a huge incentive at the demand or the consumer side. And more importantly, it's a good driver for our model and our position. Because, let's face it, we're trying to increase the value, the nutrient density, while we're reducing the risk. Health is now a commodity for the individual, and we're all unique, meaning our health is very personal. And I think that health, correlating to sort of the wealth as you just described, it ends up being call it the germination event at the soil level. So if we have fundamentally like healthy soil, biologically active, minimal amount of chemical inputs, high amounts of yields, the supply chain all of a sudden becomes much more nutrient dense, right? But what we're trying to create an incentive for, and if I threw this one to you, I'd like to hear what you said, is what if we said we can produce that, we'll call it chemical-free strawberry, and sell it to you for, let's say, 10% less? That would probably encourage more people to consume it, yes?
That's exactly right. So I want to go over how, swales kind of, are a way to think about some of these permaculture principles that Bill Mollison wrote about. To begin with, he wrote about observing and interacting. And, with swales, we think about putting them in by reading the landscape. We want to, before starting, we want to just observe the land's like natural water flow. Where does it want to go? It's a great thing to do is like when you get a real heavy rain on your land is to go out and go be like a kid again and go see what's happening. Maybe even take some video. See where that water wants to go, where you may be having an issue that you weren't aware about. And so this kind of goes into an idea that Bill Mollison said that the problem is the solution. So now, where we did have a problem maybe with erosion, now we want to consider, where's that rainwater building up at? Maybe that's where we want to consider making a little bit of a swale, planting some trees, some vegetation and creating an asset. So this is pretty cool that way. And I want to welcome Yvonne to the space. Yvonne, it's good to see you. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm out in the sunshine and nature. But regarding your comment on organic, I live in a city, but I choose to shop at a store that has basically a constitution to not sell unhealthy items. So I feel really good about supporting them. And they didn't have eggs a couple times, but I went in last week and they had Vital Farms, which is a brand that I've found very consistent, even though they come from different family farms. And honestly, I paid a little bit more for these eggs through the years because I value small farms and small business. And when I went in, they were actually the same price they've always been. And, I got my discount because I'm on their, little shopping plan. And I was just shocked because over across the street in the big grocery store, that's where people were seeing them for probably $10, $14. So, I just love that because I've supported them. They're not taking advantage of me as a shopper. They get eggs. Well, okay, we have them. But yeah, I just love that. And the other thing was I did buy a product there and I found something. There was something in the product. When I looked it up, ConAgra came up. I didn't know that this one small business was sold to ConAgra. That'll be it. I'm not buying from them again. I'll buy a local product or the ones that are made here in my state. But I think more and more people are going to start feeling this way. And I don't know, it works for me. I'm so happy for this movement. And even though I'm not a farmer, I just love all of this because it is of value. It's what's truly valuable in life. And thanks for having this space. And hi, everyone.
Hey, good to have you, Yvonne. Yeah, it's I love what you're saying about buying locally. This is something else. This is like, we talk about in permaculture. We're wasting so much energy just shipping food all over the world, and then it's not as fresh when it gets to us. When we're eating this local fresh food, I love the idea that the answer to our biggest problems is the tastiest meals that we can create locally. We just feel so much better. We taste so much. Everything tastes so much better. It's an affirmation of life. It's a celebration when we have these great meals, and the more we can do that locally, supporting people who are creating that, it's also this resilience we talk about so much. So it's awesome. What do you say, Tika?
One thing's for sure, which I think everybody can agree on, it's highly decentralized, which is actually the future. Versus the past has been monolithic, highly concentrated, and we're kind of seeing peak concentration, if you know what I mean. But if we're actually at call it the germination event or the sprouting event of, what would be a new industry based on new demand and more demand, as Yvonne just described, when she sees ConAgra going in and acquiring a small business that's adopting our model and our principle, that is a forward indicator that the people in the C-suite are starting to pay attention. And the key to that is, and this is what I want everybody to understand about how industrial agriculture works, which is if we didn't encourage and reward for the industrial model, it wouldn't actually support itself in a free market environment. And that's very tentative, if you know what I mean. And talk about local means of production, because we all do it. It means that we're actually, in a capitalist environment, we're outperforming, meaning we're providing a better product at a lower price, more or less. I mean, that sounds pretty cool, especially if we can make it environmentally friendly and adopt a regenerative model. So at that point, we actually don't need to say much more to the capitalist or the finance people. But what ends up happening is a special interest ends up capturing a government or an industry, captures a regulator or an agency, and then what they do is they say, hey, if you could actually subsidize or encourage our model, because we need that subsidy in order to scale and reward that type of planting or behavior or even machinery purchases, you can see what is happening here. So I think as advocates of regenerative,
Have a good day at school, okay?
go back to the
Thanks for bringing me the
fundamentals,
crackers.
which is, hey, we do it because we want to be healthier. That's our value add. We do it because, as Yvonne said, I support a local business, which means that you can't do this without the consumer side. Flat out, like any farmer producer says, oh, we can do this without getting the consumers on board, or we'll just charge them twice as much. It's like stepping over a C note to pick up a $5 bill. So the idea here is that we want to encourage and the producer with more demand, and that demand will be hyper-local, as I would like to say, whether it's an egg production or a raw milk, or even perhaps a commodity production, which is what I see down here in Arizona. I see a lot of people who grow like sweet corn or heritage corn, and all of a sudden they get $50,000 an acre for their corn because they're selling it directly to the consumer or through their own market. So that's what's really happening here is we're getting an anti-revolutionary environment within the ag industry. And ag industry is very large. It's a $4 trillion a year industry. For people who want to know how much the value is of that, $4 trillion a year, or fourth, depending on how you want to measure it. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And what we're trying to do is communicate our values, our principles, our models to the consumer base, and perhaps even the distribution base and some of the other marketing people too. But what we really want to do is say, hey, it's in your own best interest, whether you're an individual, whether you're an HOA, whether you're a municipality or you're a giant government. What we really want to try to communicate to them is that it's in their citizens' own interest via the sovereignty, because we're now going to take back control of the means of production locally versus perhaps become even more dependent on California, because that's where most of the food comes from.
Wow, $4 trillion. That's unreal, isn't it? Yeah, that's what it's all about, though. It's what it all goes back to. You think about economy, it just goes back to eating. This basic thing that's like the most important. It's like in America, it's like gaslighting to me at this point. Oh, we're the greatest country. It's like, well, how many taxes do I gotta pay just to live my life here? How many hoops do I have to jump through? And then what am I eating at the end of the day? Most of our food is. They have a hard time finding any food that doesn't have glyphosate in it, which is a chemical that kills the soil, that's taken us out, that's responsible for dozens of diseases. And it's unbelievable how the irony of how we've gotten away from what's most important. That foundational building block of just preserving our lives for us. And this is such a special invitation, I think, for all of us. We got spring coming up for most of us. Whether it's getting some chickens, getting some bunnies, maybe with a mind towards one day getting some cattle. Our favorite plants and everything. It makes us more self-reliant. Even just a little herb garden or keeping some herbs in the window. It ticks all the boxes, right? So even plants indoors, they're clarifying that air, they're purifying that air, they're giving us oxygen to breathe. So it really is just the way that we want to, be maximally alive and healthy and strong. And it's something in our blood that we got to get back to. We were talking earlier about, building these swales and vetiver grass. And, I just mentioned cattle. Agroforestry is a way, you see sometimes these cows on these fields, and it's a bit unnatural. There's no trees there. What's actually more natural is for there to be, maybe some grasslands with some trees here and there, where the cattle can have a break from the sun if they'd like to. And that's something that we're seeing works out better for the cattle, for them to have some rest, for them to be stronger. And this is something that we can cultivate when we're talking about putting in the swales and capturing the water, having a place for these trees to grow and making something special that way. And what do you say, Tika?
Johnny, absolutely. You guys, if we do swales, no matter what the design we choose to do, the next layer or stage of the swale is starting trees. Right? And then the aspect or call it the angle of the swale will even determine, hey, where is the best place to plant this tree and what type of tree. But once we apply the swale, we bring in the trees, we bring in the perennials, we bring in the annuals, and that's exactly what Johnny just described, is we can actually grow more nutrient density and biomass in that system or in that model. And then I wanted to kind of transition over to Yvonne. Yvonne, talk to us how the human gut or the microbiome is correlated to what we're describing via the permaculture system.
Well, I would just say that, everything's a hologram. If you want to, because I don't know, I just know that because of what I've studied in other areas of life. And so isn't it common sense that if the soil we grow our food in isn't healthy, then our biology isn't going to be healthy? I mean, it's really kind of simple that Earth provides all of these minerals and nutrients and gases and liquids, and that's what creates our bodies. And we can get it all from her as long as we treat her with love and respect and just learn from nature how nature does it so we can do it for ourselves. And we think of ourselves as these more intelligent life forms, but we have, the things all around us that we can learn from. And referring back to what Johnny said, all we need to do is get these pharmaceutical ads off the television and replace them with public service on what glyphosate is and what neonicotinoids are. And was that correct? I know, because I've listened to all of RFK's podcasts on every type of chemical that they put in our food production. So, if we could just switch that out and educate people, I don't know if it would take long for people to say, hey, wait, now to start thinking about my food.
Yeah, 100%. And we can see that the compounding effect of putting those chemicals on the ground for decades at large amounts of tonnage now is kind of coming home to roost, which is, typical, shit flows downhill. I just noticed two things. I wanted to bring everybody up to speed. Retweet if you can. We always appreciate that. This is my first one with Johnny. Regarding the design and the swale. And then I see Farmer and Jimmy down there listening. Two things about those two gentlemen is they are both regenerative permaculture experts, and they both are operating in completely different environments. Farmer's basically surrounded by resources and all sorts of water. And Jimmy lives next to the biggest ocean on the planet in a desert that, basically more or less is, I think it's considered arid. I'm not so sure what zone it is.
Si,
But
señorita.
both of them have actual, call it proof of concept at their respective locations on how they're adopting permaculture systems and regenerative models through the collection of waste via food or animal or biomass, and then they're using that waste, distributing it throughout their, call it, their plot or their farm, and then by sort of increasing the decomposition of that waste, they're now being able to create and generate inputs which can then be pushed around their property in order to grow even more biomass, which correlates to regenerative equals compounding, which means everybody out there, you get better returns and better yields and better harvests the longer you get into.
Oh, I didn't unmute myself. There we go. All right. No, well said, Scott. I love that. So, and I wanted to continue here, kind of going over the different permaculture principles that we can look at that we can see in doing swales. And the next one I got here is just talk about catching and storing this energy. Like you said, we're instead of using pumps and irrigation and electricity, we're storing this in place. And water is the driving force of all nature, so we can harness that. And then we talk about obtaining a yield, and the swales they don't just store water, but like you said, they support our food, our pasture, this ecology that we can build. This is biodiversity, right? So we're standing up with the solution to this poison system that we're in that's killing life, and this is the way that we can cultivate life and have things all work together in harmony and really produce what we need. And when we talk about food and we talk about medicine, I love what you're saying there, that these farm ads on TV are so against us. We can produce what we need locally. I think that most of us as a people of faith, we believe that we're given everything that we need to be self-reliant, and instead we've got these mad scientists. I think they are the true quacks selling us snake oil, these chemical lab-made concoctions that don't have any long-term safety testing. We can grow our own medicine. Here in the tropics, we have the neem tree, which is super easy to grow, and you can use the leaves and the oil from the seeds to do so many things to keep them as an organic insecticide, or even for keeping mold at bay. My friend's got some cows, and he's there's a vampire bat where we are, believe it or not. And just taking the neem oil and putting that on the cow is, they say, is helpful for keeping those bats at bay. So how cool is that? And something else that comes to mind is how beautiful this way of life is. You talk about starting with the swale and then with the trees and having the herbs and all the annuals and having everything there and the animals enjoying that. And it's this is something that our kids can really get into and really benefit from, and it's like the perfect education where these principles of life are evident for people to pick up on. So I really dig that.
Not only that, Johnny, but one of my favorite parts about biology as a person who sells biology is that anybody can make their own biology. And that, yet again, it's a decentralized system. So if, an individual says, hey, how do we actually start creating biology? We can sort of educate them on where that information would be. Then they can identify how it works within their system, and they don't have to go out and buy some highly specialized, expensive chemical formula via liquid to actually get it going. It's like, hey, how do I start creating biology? It's like, do you drink coffee and eat fruit? Yes, I do. It's like, okay, take your coffee and take your fruit, put it in a bin and cover it in the ground. Congratulations, you just started creating biology. It certainly can be more sophisticated than that if we want it to be, but at the fundamental level, in order to create biology for the individual, it requires very little effort or cost, and that in itself is highly decentralized, which is why I love biology so much when compared to a chemistry model.
Building the life, building the harmony. How cool is that? Isn't that great? I love that. So yeah, obtain the yield. Go ahead.
I was going to mention Jimmy. I spoke to Jimmy recently about a worm bin, and if you guys want like truly the secret ingredient to holistic regenerative farming, some people think it's the bacteria, other people think it's the fungus, some people think it's the microbe or the nematode. They are all required. But when we talk about decomposition of waste and we want to get real biology going with call it like layers of organisms on top. If we can achieve worms, which Jimmy was describing the other day, is like I can take a small amount of worms and create massive amounts of worms. So now we're growing protein, and as soon as we start deploying the chelate or the waste or the casting of the worm, boy, that's a lot of biology and a lot of activity in there. And as Jimmy kind of had described, is all of a sudden you end up becoming kind of addicted to biology and composting. And as we compost more, we get more worms, and then we start to get more birds, right? We get more predators, we get more layers, if you will. And that system, call it closed loop regenerative ag, ends up creating not only a holistic environment, but it doesn't really matter if you're in the middle of the desert or as in farmer's case, you're surrounded by water and trees. Either way, you're going to end up creating biology, and worms are something that's highly accessible. You can obviously get them online. I'd recommend buying them by the pound and introducing them into your decomposition or your compost model, because it will speed up the actual decomposition process. It will increase the value or the performance of the biology, and it will provide both a dried input or casting, or you can actually solubilize it via liquid and water and mixation. And now all of a sudden what just happened, you guys, is you are truly sovereign. You don't need chemicals. You really just need nature. And then what happens with nature is it starts to grow. Because why? Because it's healthy.
That's right. Yeah, the worms making that black gold. There's studies where they're just mystified about how the worm castings are so beneficial. They got so many nutrients, where it's more than what we're seeing from the food that we're feeding to the worms. They're like, how are they doing this? So, welcome, Jimmy. Thanks for coming up and grabbing the mic. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's funny. It's this morning I just spent the last couple hours making a exterior worm bed. As I look at it now, instead of a planter, or it's like I'm creating places for worms to live outside of these boxes, because it's a pain in the ass dealing with them in the boxes. And you realize in my climate, if I treat the area well, I don't have to. I'm creating the compost now where I want the soil to be, and I'm making it for worms. And once the worms are in there, then I plant whatever I like. And depending on what I've done and whether or not to an outline or an aesthetic plant. But the worm castings are absolutely blowing my mind. The potency of them, and the fact you can't really overdo it. It naturally uptakes into the plant what it needs. But I listened to this guy the other day, and just as he was saying it, I was already coming to that realization. It's like, why do I have a pile of compost over there, and then I keep moving it over here? It's just, why don't I just make the compost right there? And it's like you were saying, just throw the fruits and vegetables, your coffee grounds and your banana peels. And if you've got animals or something, they'll dig them up. There's a trick to it that you just put in a food container for feeding the worm, a feeding station. And I've done that just to see. I don't really have a real problem with coyotes digging anything up or whatever. But, banana peels and coffee grounds and cardboard they love. And I just made this out exterior worm bed. And the reason I call it that is because I dug a ditch in hard, solid dirt. Which is what we have out here. It's not soil, it's dirt. The topsoil is beautiful, but it's very thin. But you get down into it, and it's like concrete. You dig out a ditch, and then I put in cardboard first thing, and then put in coconut wire, and then put in soil, then put in more cocoa. And the fact is, if you're putting cardboard in the bottom, it's like, yeah, and then I even covered the top of it with it. because of the moisture and holding it in, and at the same time worms. As Tico knows, and he taught me soak the cardboard ahead of time. I even soak it in things that already have microbes. So I make worm tea and soak the cardboard in it, and it's amazing that how quickly you can turn dirt into soil, and it's a natural process. As long as I keep it moist, they can go down to get out of the heat, and they seem to be fine. And I think I can do this year round in most of these places, and that's amazing because it accelerates the natural food forest. And I just love a lot of things. Like I've got a lot of grasses growing. People go, "You planted?" I didn't plant any of that stuff. I mean, a lot of the stuff growing around the ranch, I just let it go because I want to see it's chamomile, wild daisies, all kinds of things grow just by nature, and it makes me great mulch if I'm not using it. Like the water's coming out and other things grow along the base of my trees and whatnot. Well, then it gets wet enough, I dig it up and I start putting worms there. And so that's what I'm realizing is you get the natural jump start. And then I can take away the water after a while. I had an area that for 3 weeks I didn't give it water to see, and this ivy growing up the side of the building is amazing. And dig down in the soil, it's moist all the time, and it's like perfect area for worms. So yeah, it's amazing on the desert. It makes such a radical change to see it. It's fun to do it. It makes it more than working in other environments that are a lot easier.
Jimmy, we were also discussing with Adam earlier about the storage, the capture, and the release of water. Tell us a little bit about how you see that in your system. And mind you, everybody, Jimmy is in a highly arid climate with incredibly alkaline soil with almost no organic matter. So it's very difficult to grow things in that environment. But how he stores and slows the water that's falling either out of the air, or Jimmy, tell him a little bit about how the ocean creates the moisture, the dew, or the water in the morning, and how the plants respond to that.
Yeah, actually, it's plants and animals. We find out that I was going to put out tanks of water to encourage deer to come, but they won't drink out of still water. And you're like, never thought of that. But wild deer are like never seen themselves in a mirror image like that. And secondly, they lick it off the plants, and that's how cows and many things survive out here. But yeah, the dew in the morning is a big survivor. It's an arid climate. We didn't even have rain. Basically, in a year, we have not had rain, and at all. Well, spatter, but I mean, literally, didn't even cover the soil. It's the first time since I moved out here that's happened. But I don't know if that happened. And then we'll have torrential rains another year. But the trick is to do it in zones, and I'm doing it in areas that matter first. And you see the benefit of it already, and then covering up the soil. And once we do have rains, it grows like we wouldn't believe here. But the runoff is insane because it's sand and it's a mesa, it's a flat top mountain right next to the ocean. And the runoff on the sides creates these arroyos just instantly that are wild. So swales and the ponds won't necessarily be really ponds, but they'll be wet areas. And maybe after many years, they'll actually have standing water year round. But the point is that none of that is done, and as I do it, you can already see the blocking of wind, the creation of shade, adding some water to it to jumpstart things. It all works, and I'm doing it in an environment. You say I don't have much biomass, but you can't walk straight anywhere on this ranch. You have to walk around like a goat or a cow, meandering because it's up and around, and there's huge cactus. I have giant cardones everywhere. There's a whole forest of everywhere you look is giant cactus that are 100 years old. They're supposed to be protected, but the reality is I can farm around them, and you can build around them and live around them. It's a matter of learning to work with what's here. And as I've learned permaculture, it's like, it's actually easy compared to what other people have already done. They have greened up deserts that really look like deserts. This place does not look like a desert, and it hasn't rained in a year. But when you're here in the foggy mornings, you're like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah, it looks like it rained. It's just dripping. Everything drips. And so there's always water in the air here. It's somewhat with the sea breeze. I live in an arid desert with a daily sea breeze. I'm only a kilometer and a half, about a mile back from the ocean. So I have the fog and all those benefits. And it's far enough back that it doesn't seem to be so much salt that a lot of plants benefit from it. So like this ivy, and a lot of these plants get growing, and if they're in a shaded area, I just get them jump started, and I don't have to do it. Now, come summer, there may be some plants I have to make sure I water, and it depends what kind of summer it is. But the more capturing I do, and the more I learn about permaculture, and I'm no expert in the sense that I'm applying it. like most people can. I have a 1,000-acre ranch, an experiment, a place to experiment, a place to try things, a tractor and dump truck, and time to do it. I like a kid with a sandbox, testing things. And so with the internet, I'm able to study so fast, so many things, and try things. And like this idea of making the worm bed outside, I watch a woman making raised beds, and I don't really do raised beds, but don't need them. But at the same time, the auto watering of putting the mulch in the bottom and how you layer it up and how you create it is totally different than that used to be when you did gardening. But the fact is, you're just mimicking nature, and you're trying to accelerate the microbes, accelerate the worms, accelerate everything, and doing that, you just want to get them ideal conditions. And I'm finding that anyway, that you study up on worms, you're either going to get in the business of selling worms, or you got to do something with them, because they grow very fast. And once you get them really going in boxes, it's like, wow, okay, I don't need them in more boxes. I'm just going to start putting them in the ground and take care of them in the ground. And that's where it makes sense, because it's less work. It's once again less input, more output.
100%, Jimmy. We're seeing too the new worm, or an additional tool that we want everybody to know that is kind of coming into fruition, is the black soldier fly, which we have the ability to actually raise. Crickets are another one, where we can raise black soldier fly very easily in a model very similar to worm castings. And what we've done there, you guys, is whether it's a feed for the animal, which is what you see a lot of people utilize for chickens, and frass in general is high in protein, which is what we want to feed our animals. What ends up happening is that protein source, or that food, call it concentrated via the soldier fly or the frass, is going to end exactly being regenerative and closed loop. So, if anybody is out there looking for black soldier fly or cricket raising, because as Jimmy just described, it's like more addictive than whatever. Right, you can do it so fast and it works so well, whether it's worms, black soldier fly, or crickets, that all of a sudden you're going to be like, am I going to make a business out of this, or am I going to just start giving it to everybody else? Or, as Jimmy described, am I just going to start putting it all over my 1,000 acres? Any way we kind of slice it or measure it, there's a lot of value in that means of production, because it's highly decentralized, and the output versus input, what Jimmy just described, is basically where we are just outperforming and beating these guys who are not adopting our models every which way.
I will say, you don't think things can scale up, but growing worms so far for me has been not a problem. I got like maybe 100 of them. When I got started, I have thousands and thousands, and I put them in tons of places, including self-cooking beds, IVC container where I check on them regularly and feed them. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. You can see come for the food, and especially in the night, and dig it up a bit, and you can see them all over the place. So they're survivors, and yeah, it's amazing, because it's like fertilizing in place, and some of the best fertilizer, you can't really overdo it.
Descansar un momento y hacer tres más. Prácticamente exactamente 1 hora para hacer tres. Ya está yendo despacio.
I just want to get it out there in nature, all over this ranch, piece by piece. It's going to acre by acre.
Not only that, Jimmy, but let's say somebody wants to scale worm bins, and they're doing it in Wisconsin, which, by the way, the largest worm producer is in Wisconsin. And what they do is they try to farm out the production process to the small farmer, which is very similar to the Vital Egg model, Yvonne. But what really comes down to it in that environment, and this is good, bad, or indifferent, but what Jimmy is producing is a much higher quality, value, and performance versus perhaps maybe the industrial casting, because the industrial casting, as a government requirement, has to be pasteurized or heated, just like milk.
right. We went ahead and broke down 3 chickens, just under an hour. We're gonna do 3 more. We're gonna cut the camera. Thanks for joining us.